Everybody ready? The other thing which is painfully obvious is to talk anyway. This is to talk about.
Good morning. So whistleblowing is the topic of today's Advisory Committee on Transparency discussion. Federal whistleblowers report law-breaking and taxpayer rip-offs, often at great personal and professional risk. Today, we'll explore whether we've struck the right balance between encouraging whistleblowing and protecting confidentiality. We'll also examine whether whistleblowers are sufficiently protected against retaliation, and we'll look at whether the Internet has changed how we talk about these issues. Today's event is hosted by the Advisory Committee on Transparency, which is a project of the Sunlight Foundation that brings together an association of organizations to educate policymakers on transparency issues. You can find out more information at transparencycaucus.org. I'd also like to thank Representatives Darrell Issa and Mike Quigley, the co-chairs of the Congressional Transparency Caucus, for making this space available to us. And I also will beg your indulgence since I'm a little bit sick, so hopefully I don't sound too strange today. I'd like to start by introducing our panelists. All the way at the far end of the table is Carolyn Lerner. She's the recently confirmed Special Counsel for the U.S. Office of Special Counsel, which represents federal whistleblowers and other victims of discrimination within the government. Next to her is Angela Canterbury, the Director of Public Policy at the Project on Government Oversight, which is a nonpartisan watchdog that investigates government corruption, misconduct, and conflicts of interest. Next to her is Christian Sanchez, a Border Patrol agent and whistleblower within the Customs and Border Protection Agency, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security. And finally, next to me is Micah Sifry, a co-founder and editor of the Personal Democracy Forum, author of WikiLeaks in the Age of Transparency, available now on Amazon.com and probably elsewhere. And he's also a senior technology advisor for the Sunlight Foundation, and he did not pay me for this endorsement. I'd like to start off with Carolyn, if you wouldn't mind making some opening remarks.
Can you hear me all right? Okay. Good morning. I want to thank the Sunlight Foundation and the other members of the Advisory Committee on Transparency for organizing this event. I also want to thank Chairman Issa and Representative Quigley, the co-chairs of the Congressional Transparency Caucus, for sponsoring today's discussion. This is actually my first public speaking engagement since I was confirmed and sworn in as special counsel 6 weeks ago. So it's especially meaningful for me to be here with you today, and it's terrific to see so many of you here. Though I've only been on the job a short time, I feel some urgency to reinvigorate this important agency. I'm beginning at a time when our country is in a fiscal crisis, and as Congress tries to tighten the budget, OSC's role has never been more important. The Office of Special Counsel is a small agency with a big mission. We promote government accountability, efficiency, and transparency by providing a safe channel for government employees to report waste, fraud, and abuse, or threats to public health and safety. Government workers are in the best position to uncover wrongdoing. Study after study demonstrates that insiders, employees, are the single best source for identifying costly wrongdoing and harm. One recent study in the private sector showed that outside regulators and auditors uncovered corporate fraud in only 1 out of 6 cases. It is the people inside companies who are most likely to report wrongdoing because they are the ones who know about it. And though these employees performed an important service, the same private sector study found that 80% of the whistleblowers regretted coming forward because of the negative consequences that they suffered. At the Office of Special Counsel, we know that the experience of federal employees who have reported wrongdoing is all too similar. About 80% of the people who come to our agency with disclosures often then report retaliation as well. This is a culture that must change. Whistleblowing is crucial to making large institutions more accountable by improving transparency, and the federal government should be setting the pace. Public servants need to feel confident that they can speak out without fear of retaliation. And when they do, we must make sure that the government is held accountable for correcting any misconduct that they uncover. Creating an environment inside the government where open dialogue about problems is accepted and indeed encouraged is one of my goals as special counsel. And the Office of Special Counsel is especially able to do this given its independence. When it established the OSC, Congress understood that for the agency to be effective, it must have full freedom to act on behalf of whistleblowers, even if that upsets other agencies or the White House. So while I was nominated by President Obama and confirmed by the Senate, I do not serve at the pleasure of either the President or the Congress. I have a fixed term of 5 years, and no matter how good a job I may do, and I hope it's very good, I cannot be reappointed. This unique status ensures that the Office of Special Counsel is not subject to influence or pressure when we conduct investigations or make prosecution decisions. We are able to advocate on behalf of the lowest level employee against the highest ranking official in an agency. OSC is also unique because, unlike inspectors general, we are not tied to any one agency, and with few exceptions, we have the ability to hold any government agency accountable. And Congress has mandated that we make it a priority to help whistleblowers. Although we are a small agency with a very small budget, about 5% the budget of military bands, I might mention, our work provides enormous value to American taxpayers. It is reflected in saved lives, improved government efficiency, and significant cost savings for the federal government. For example, disclosures from the Federal Aviation Administration whistleblowers have helped to avoid costly tragedies that could result in the loss of hundreds of lives and billions of dollars. Whistleblower disclosures to OSC led to safer flights, including better maintenance of aging aircraft, the cancellation of unsafe flight patterns, and correcting safety hazards in air traffic control towers. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina cost the federal government $127 billion. But that didn't stop the Army Corps of Engineers from attempting to install an untested and potentially flawed flood protection system when a more reliable and less expensive option was available. If a whistleblower had not come forward to OSC to report these unsafe practices, the same devastation could have easily been repeated the next time a hurricane hits the Gulf. In the health area, OSC's efforts have led to better care for veterans at VA hospitals, including protecting patients in psychiatric treatment, ensuring that surgical instruments are actually sterilized, and doctors were not performing procedures for which they had no expertise. OSC's accomplishments are due to the hard work of the dedicated staff that serves the agency. However, it's no secret that prior to my arrival at the agency, it was racked by controversy and had been without Senate-confirmed leadership for 2.5 years. It is going to take time to rebuild this agency, and it will take collaboration with each of the agency's stakeholders to do so. Everyone in this room has an interest in OSC's successful enforcement of the good government laws. As we move forward, I want to hear from you about how the OSC can best serve the public interest. For the congressional staff in the room, I encourage you to work with my office and refer your constituents' disclosures or concerns about retaliation. We want to be a resource, and we want to make sure that these claims are handled quickly and well. Quickly and well. Finally, while there is much to be done, there are some very real limits on what the Office of Special Counsel can actually do under present law. OSC is currently hampered by court interpretations of whistleblower law. These interpretations have narrowed the protections intended by Congress, and they also dissuade OSC from seeking disciplinary action against wrongdoers. We look forward to working closely with many of you as Congress considers legislation to strengthen the Whistleblower Protection Act. A stronger whistleblower law will allow employees to feel safe coming forward and speaking out in the public interest. While no system of whistleblower protection will be foolproof, there is no question that in the absence of such protection, the public loses the surest source of information about waste, fraud, and abuse, the government employee with the integrity and the courage to come forward. In closing, I want to again thank the organizers of this event for giving me the opportunity to speak today, and I look forward to hearing from the other panelists and to taking your questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Angela.
Good morning. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Daniel, and Sunlight Foundation, and the Transparency Caucus, the co-chairs Isa and Representative Quigley. I am the Director of Public Policy at the Project on Government Oversight, also known as POGO. We also are on the advisory committee for the Transparency Caucus. My organization for 30 years has worked with whistleblowers, both in terms of uncovering wrongdoing and exploring solutions through our investigations, but also we work to improve protections for whistleblowers. We're not alone. We work in coalition. We work with dozens of really dedicated, wonderful nonprofit organizations. Tom Devine is in the room with GAP at the Government Accountability Project, one of our very solid partners in pursuing whistleblower protections. A word about our funding at POGO. I think it's important to say that we take no funds from corporations, unions. We take no government money, just private donations. I think today we're going to puzzle over whistleblowing a little bit, leaks, WikiLeaks, the New World Order, perhaps. But when we're talking seriously about cutting government waste and making the government work better, we have to talk about making whistleblowing work. And as the country is in the middle of this debt ceiling debacle, budget cuts, our economy is in dire straits, we know one thing for sure, and that is that whistleblowing saves taxpayer dollars. And the best proof of this is the False Claims Act, which has been a huge success. This is the law that allows citizens to tell us and file a claim when the government is being ripped off. And before the law was changed, this was, returning U.S. funds in the order of, in the 20 millions a year. But in 1986, Senators Grassley and Berman added an incentive and asked whistleblowers to bring more claims forward, and if they did and there was a successful return of government funds, they would get a cut, a small percentage. And after that, every year we've averaged about $1 billion in return. Last year it was $3 billion. So Carolyn mentioned that studies have shown over and over again that whistleblowers are incredibly effective. A PricewaterhouseCoopers survey of some 5,000 corporations worldwide showed that whistleblowers catch more internal fraud than law enforcement, auditors, and compliance officers combined. Shortly, you're going to hear from Christian, who has fought to stop the waste of some taxpayer dollars, but there are countless other examples. And that's why partners of ours like the National Taxpayers Union strongly support whistleblower protections, along with more than 400 other NGOs from across the ideological spectrum. It's also why we are very dismayed that right now the proposed budget for fiscal year 2012 has a nonsensical proposed cut of about $2 million for the Office of Special Counsel. We think that is the wrong way to begin to heal the agency and restore it. It's the wrong way to save taxpayer dollars. I'm convinced that every dollar that we put into the Office of Special Counsel will yield, will multiply the taxpayer dollars that we can save. So I think if the President and Congress are really serious about saving taxpayer dollars, they're going to invest in whistleblowers. Federal whistleblowers are on the front lines. Sometimes a federal employee is not planning on becoming a whistleblower at all. They're just doing their jobs. They're just honest. They come forward, and once they face retaliation is when they realize that maybe they're a whistleblower. Many whistleblowers are heroes, but it really is only in the movies that they get treated as such. What is it like today to blow the whistle? I'm sure Christian will share his experience, but for many, it is a nightmare. It's a living nightmare. The system is broken. It's antiquated, and the law that is designed to protect whistleblowers, the Whistleblower Protection Act, has been flawed, has been eroded by flawed court decisions and bad administrative practices. As Carolyn said, it is essential that we upgrade this law the MSPB, which is the place where whistleblowers go to have their claims of retaliation adjudicated after they have gone to the Office of Special Counsel, has only decided in favor of 2 whistleblowers between the years 2000 and 2009. The Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, which currently has the monopoly on court review appeals of whistleblower cases for federal employees, only decided in favor of 3 whistleblowers out of 219 since 1994. So clearly something is wrong. You add to this the chilling effect of an administration that has engaged in more prosecutions of disclosures than any other, and the message is, be quiet. And the result is more leaks. So if there were more safe channels and better protections for federal employees, there would be fewer leaks. We would have more federal employees going to those safe channels and warning us when there's wrongdoing. So there is some hope. There is an understanding, I think, that whistleblowers are guardians and that they are partners in crime fighting. Congress has very eagerly enfranchised private sector workers. They have acknowledged that it's sort of a key component of any accountability plan to have some whistleblower protections. It's been more difficult to convince them to protect federal employees. But the president and both the minority and the majority in Congress have voiced strong support for whistleblower protections. Of course, we have Carolyn Lerner as the new special counsel, which is very encouraging. She's quite an advocate for whistleblowers. Susan Grunman as the chair of the MSPB, also very promising. And there's legislation pending with strong bipartisan support that's really an anti-leaks, anti-corruption, pro-whistleblower, pro-taxpayer protection measure, and that is the Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act. It's S-743. It was reintroduced this year in the Senate by Senators Akaka, Lieberman, Collins, and Grassley. And it would close many of these loopholes that have been created by these bad court decisions. It would expand protections. For the first time, there would be protections for national security intelligence workers, those who are challenging security clearance revocations, which is a really popular form of retaliation. It would expand protections to baggage screeners at airports and give specific protections to federal scientists. It would also allow for more normal access to court. So all of the private sector laws that we've passed since 2002, those 11 statutes all allow for jury trials. Federal employees who blow the whistle have been denied jury trials. The Senate bill would allow for some limited access, but to access to jury trials in district court, which we think is an important thing when the administrative process fails. It has some improvements for the Office of Special Counsel and the MSPB. Is it everything that we've been seeking? Is it all that we hoped it could be? No. But it's a pretty good down payment, and it would go a long way to improve the circumstances for whistleblowers today. Now, this bill already passed unanimously in the Senate last year, and it's queued for passage again on the House side. However, in the 11th hour of the 111th Congress, there was a red herring about WikiLeaks raised in association with the bill, and it did pass in a different version, largely thanks to the White House and partners in Congress and working hard, and partners like National Taxpayers Union. But it was sent over to the Senate on the last day of the last Congress, and one senator, or maybe two, put a hold on it and left town. So this year, Chairman Issa of House Oversight and Government Reform and Ranking Member Cummings, as well as last year's co-sponsors in the House, Van Hollen and Representative Platts, have all pledged to move the bill, and we've been working with their staff so that we can have a bill with strong bipartisan support introduced shortly in the House, and we are hoping that these reforms will be at least as positive as the Senate bill, including access to court and expanded protections for intel and national security workers. But we are nearly into August, and meanwhile, whistleblowers are waiting, and many of them in silence, and others are waiting without recourse for the retaliation that they have been experiencing. Some are in limbo. Taxpayers are waiting for the President and Congress to deliver on all this transparency and accountability. And so I urge you all to become informed about the bill. For staffers, I'd be happy to speak with you further. And I really thank you for your interest in the topic of whistleblowing, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Great. Thank you, Angela. Christian.
Well,
when you
thank
turn
you.
your mic, there you go.
Thank you for having me. I never intended to be a whistleblower, but I'm here as a private citizen speaking not on behalf of the Border Patrol. I'm just here to speak about the betrayal of the taxpayers and the amount of money that's being spent and also our national security. Currently, a facility is being built that's approximately $8 million in a small station in Port Angeles, Washington. This facility used to be housed by 4 agents, and now we're up to 40. So 4 agents used to do the job of what 40 are doing, and it just struck a chord on me to be at a station where we have nothing to do. So you have this new building, they have to house it. They've got to put new agents in there, new resources, and that's where I've come to terms that if I'm working 8 hours, I don't need to be working 8 hours doing nothing when 4 agents used to do that. And there's administratively uncontrolled overtime that is on top of the 8 hours that we work that they want us to work, and I just simply did not want to work that. It's just a burden on the taxpayers right now, especially with the economy, with taxpayers, with Medicare being cut, with all the foreclosures. So I had a hard time taking the extra 2 hours. I'm a chaplain, so that was a conflict for me. Because of that, retaliation in the workplace has increased. My family's been terrorized. Vehicles have been driving by the cul-de-sac. My mail's been opened. And it's been really tasking on my family. So to have that type of retaliatory advances right in my neighborhood, and I've had my kid just say to my wife, "Mom, why is he watching us? Vehicle is just driving by, and my son just makes that comment," and it just brings a pause in my wife, and it's tasking. She brings the kids inside. So just to bring it back, the taxpayers are paying us all this extra money to do nothing on this peninsula where it's a water-based border. Canada's pretty far away from that, and we're just driving around the peninsula, and because I've spoken out about this uncontrollable, administrative uncontrollable overtime, they've started retaliating on me, and other agents will take it. It's free money. It's money. If you give it to us, we'll accept it. It's just like the facility here. If you give them $8 million, they'll house this place. They'll just start buying resources for it. So to put it in perspective, the AUO is for 40 agents is about $3 million in salaries. And before it used to be for $240,000 for 4 agents that used to house this facility. Supervisors, another thing for taxpayers, that supervisors have government rides that they seldom ever go out. They seldom ever use these government rides for the intended purpose that the taxpayer has for us, and that's to use them and patrol the border, our national security.
Could you talk about what you did before you transferred to this office, like the type of work you did before?
Before I did this, we worked in San Diego in a rural area near Tecate, and gangs and all kinds of activity would cross over in multitudes of 40 plus. So we would run up into the mountains, and it would be a single agent, myself or someone else, and we would apprehend 40 agents by ourselves, surrounded at night, different hours. So that was part of the job. That was something that we wouldn't blink, and sure, the danger is there, but up in the northern border, there's nothing to do. There are no gangs or any activity doing cross-border activity. I haven't seen it, and it's rare. In 2 years that I've been there, a lot of the agents are really just going stir-crazy for not doing anything. They're trying to go back to where they knew that they had activity on the southern border near Arizona and California. Here we're just spinning our wheels, and I've heard of, as a chaplain, I've heard of other agents say that they're getting depressed. All this indefensible spending because they want to man that facility.
Would you talk, so when you moved from where you were before, where you were busy all the time, to where you are now, where you basically have nothing to do, you were saying that they've been mistreating you a bit, where they were driving by your house and things like that. Could you talk about that just a little bit more, explaining like how they're mistreating you?
Sure. The retaliatory effects have started since I stopped working my administrative uncontrolled overtime. I've voiced out, we don't need this money. We don't need to take this at the cost of taxpayers. So I've been interrogated for, I was interrogated for 5 hours for speaking up, continual 5 hours, and repeatedly supervisors have asked me to go see get psychological treatment through our EAP, and it's just been things like that have been tasking. They've taken away shift supervisory duties that normally a senior agent takes. My days have been taken away. Just a whole bunch of retaliatory things have been written. Anything is an excuse to write me up for insubordination, for asserting myself on certain positions. I seldom ever speak about anything. Like sometimes our musters last, or our briefings. The morning briefing is where they give you your detailed assignment. Those will last up to 3 hours because we've got nothing to do. Nothing to do. We talk about anything and everything but what we're going to do, because we're numbing ourselves from just spinning our wheels there. So that's part of some of the retaliatory things that have occurred, and the last one is where my chaplain duties were taken away. That is just part of the retaliatory things that have been occurring to me for speaking up.
Thank you. We'll talk about this some more a little bit later on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Micah, you can use this one.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks to Sunlight Foundation and Representatives Issa and Quigley for setting up this advisory committee. I think it's appropriate that we're meeting today to talk about strengthening whistleblower protections, not only because it was 233 years ago that the Continental Congress actually enacted the first whistleblower protections. I don't know if you picked the state knowing that. It's actually July 30th, 1778. But I think also with the country focused on this debate over the debt ceiling, and which is all fundamentally about how we spend taxpayer money, and you would think that if Congress wanted to demonstrate more seriousness about saving the taxpayers' money, that they would be adding funding to the OSC rather than trying to subtract funding from it. Similarly, they'd be adding funding for the government's e-government programs like data.gov instead of whacking those budgets as well. It's penny wise and pound foolish. I don't know how many of you got a chance to read the paper today. There's a great and appropriate story in the New York Times about China, which I thought would be worth mentioning to sort of frame my remarks. The headline is, "In Bearing Facts of Train Crash, Blogs Erode China Censorship." And the story describes how 5 days ago there was a terrible railway crash, killed more than 40 people, 2 trains collided. And the official Chinese news paid very little attention to it. But meanwhile, social media in China, which is as robust or even more than here in the United States, has been all over the story. Within minutes, there were people on the scene who were doing the equivalent of tweeting. And according to this New York Times story, there have been more than 26 million posts about this railway disaster, and a lot of them have had the effect of uncovering government misbehavior, such as railway workers literally burying the train, the head car of one of the trains in the accident, burying it on the scene to prevent further inquiry into maybe what the cause was. And when bloggers managed to uncover this fact, they spread that news so widely that the government has been forced to dig up that train and send it out for further inspection. What does this tell us about the age we're entering? Well, I would argue that we are into an age of mass participation, and we're going to see more and more citizen watchdogging and whistleblowing take place. I think a lot of our conversation is going to be about this issue of leaks, and how do we deal with leaks? How do we stop leaks? Are leaks good or bad? Leaking is the wrong metaphor, because it makes you think that what we're talking about here is a little drip of information that's escaping, when in fact the correct metaphor, and I'm borrowing this point from Harvard professor Larry Lessig, is that we are living in an age of an information tsunami. And the question is, or one of the questions I think, is how should government deal with that? Under the 20th century model of government that we now have, the administrative model, the hierarchy rules, right? And either you stay within channels or you're punished when you actually try to speak out, as Christian Sanchez was just describing. And absolutely, we have to strengthen the protections for people on the inside to speak out. But I think we also have to recognize that we're seeing the emergence of a whole new paradigm where the boundaries between what government is and what the public is are getting blurred, in the same way that the old lines between businesses and consumers are also blurring. And so I think it's important that we recognize the reaction to this flood cannot be to just lash out and try and punish individuals. It's sort of like the boy putting his finger in the dike. What the United States government did in response to Bradley Manning, who at least is accused of leaking all this information to WikiLeaks, was the wrong response. And by the way, I should mention that Manning has been now held for a year, waiting to go on trial. A year. You'd think that the wheels of justice could move a little faster. But the response that we saw after WikiLeaks started publishing things like the Iraq and Afghan war logs and then the State Department cables was way over the top. Not just the rhetoric about trying to assassinate or otherwise harass Julian Assange, but the extra-governmental actions that amounted to extra-legal kinds of censorship. I mean, imagine if when the Pentagon Papers were being published by the New York Times, that the Nixon administration Justice Department would have gone after the paper suppliers and said, are you going to keep selling paper to the New York Times so it can keep publishing? But that's effectively what Senator Lieberman did in going after companies like Amazon and PayPal. And it's exactly the wrong response, because it's the boy putting his finger in the dike. The flood is what we have to deal with. And I would argue that when we try to suppress information in this age, we actually just make it more valuable and interesting. It's called the Streisand effect. And that's from when Barbra Streisand got upset because a geological survey of the California coastline that had been done, that was photographs of every 100 feet of coastline, and it was published online, and she sued to try and get the pictures of her house removed. And all that did was make people more interested in seeing pictures of her house. So I think it's important to recognize we are swimming in a sea of social media. And this is it is only going to rise. It's not going down. And inevitably, all that media is going to include more and more previously privileged information, including vital information about waste, fraud, and abuse. And so the question I think we should be exploring is, how do we deal with the tsunami, because we can't stop it?
Great. Thank you very much. I think I'd like to start in the context of, we're talking around some terms, whistleblowing and retaliation. But I think I'd like to make them more concrete. What is whistleblowing, and what are the different types of retaliation that people suffer? This might be sort of a good foundational question as we kick off this discussion. Is there, Carolyn, you're looking at me, would you like to start with that?
Sure. Whistleblowing is sort of shorthand for when somebody sees something that's wrong and they report it. In the government context, there are some very kind of complicated hoops that employees have to go through to make sure that their reporting of waste, fraud, and abuse or a health and safety issue is actually covered by the Whistleblower Protection Act. For example, if it's within your job responsibility to uncover waste, fraud, and abuse, and then you report it, you're not covered as a whistleblower. If you make a report of wrongdoing to the person who is doing the thing about which you're reporting, you're also not covered. But generally, if you're a whistleblower, it means that you know about something that's wrong, waste, fraud, or abuse, a health or safety issue, and you report it. And what was the second definition that you wanted to know about?
And what is retaliation?
Retaliation is when something bad happens to you for having blown the whistle or for having come out with the information. I mean, that's in its very simplest term. But some examples of that are when an employee in the federal government may have his or her duties taken away. We heard an example today about someone's duty, Mr. Sanchez's duties as a chaplain being taken away from him, being referred for psychiatric evaluation or told to go see the employee assistance program. Often, it's even more dire where someone loses their job or is threatened with termination. They could be suspended, they can be transferred to another place, they can be told to move to another state or another duty station. Really, it's any action that has an adverse consequence on someone's terms or conditions of work would be considered retaliation in the federal government.
That's a good answer.
We certainly asked the right person. So I guess the sort of a follow-up question is, how does the context of the communication affect how we think about it? So you can have, you can go and tell your supervisor, you can tell someone within Congress, you can tell someone within the executive branch, like OSC, you can go to the press, you can go and put information on the internet. As people report information in different ways, in different media, does that change how we think about whistleblowing and its legitimacy? And should it change how we think about those kinds of things?
Well, it changes the legal protections that are available to the person blowing the whistle. As Carolyn mentioned, there are, a labyrinth of rules, law to navigate in order to be considered protected. If it's a protected disclosure, as she said, if you report it to the person who is doing the wrongdoing, or if you aren't the very first person to have disclosed the wrongdoing. And this is part of the case law that has eroded congressional intent that we're trying to fix. I would say we would all be better off as a society. We would have a better government if we just protected all whistleblowing, if everybody got to go to court, and if we didn't put so many constraints on what whistleblowing is, but we don't live in that world, and so the best we can do is try to make more sense of the law and make it easier for people to come forward. Think about, if you know you could be retaliated against, and I think most federal employees do. I think most federal employees have gotten the message that they're putting their jobs on the line at the very least if they come forward with something that's going to rattle their office. And think about, the cost-benefit analysis that you might do given those conditions. There's not a lot of benefit here. In fact, there's zero. It's all cost for a federal employee. So the least we can do, if we're not going to incentivize, as we do for private citizens, we'll give you a piece of the reward that you recover for us as taxpayers. If we're not going to incentivize it, we at least need to make it so that they can have recourse for their suffering.
Does anybody else want to address this as well?
I guess the only thing I just want to add to that is expanding on my remarks at the beginning, which is that if you change the culture of government, and this is obviously not going to happen overnight, but it should be a valuable thing. We should view it as something that helps people progress in their careers if they disclose waste, fraud, or abuse, or health or safety concerns. It should be viewed in a positive way, not as something that should be covered up or the subject of disciplinary action. And it shouldn't require litigation for someone to feel that they have protections from coming forward. And I think the message has to come from the very head of each agency that we want people to come forward and make these disclosures. It should be, if not compensated financially, it should be rewarded in some way. So finding ways to change the culture in our government, I think, is a really important first step.
Sure, and let me just sort of follow on that. Does it matter how the context of that reporting? So if it's done through, if you try to go through official channels, for example, and either nothing happens from going through official channels, or worse, you find that you're retaliated against, and then you go in and you talk to the press, for example. Should the concept of whistleblowing and the protections that we're envisioning, should it sort of go into that, protect in that context as well? Or is that starting to go too far?
I can answer that very quickly, which is that the context, one of the longest standing principles of whistleblower law is that the context shouldn't matter. The forum, the form, or the context for making a protected disclosure should not matter. It's not relevant.
So I would also like to add on to what Carolyn said about it being about leadership and changing the culture, and I have a lot of hope that you're going to be able to encourage some culture change by working with the agencies. I think that they've ignored whistleblowers in the best of cases, and worse have sought to punish them and turn them into villains instead of heroes in the worst of circumstances. But we need to address the fact that we also have a president who has been very supportive in speeches and behind the scenes in terms of protecting, working for stronger protections for whistleblowers. Even as an attorney, he represented a whistleblower, worked on a case for a whistleblower, and I think he really does understand the value of whistleblowers. But I don't know that everybody got the memo in the administration, because the memo that they did get after WikiLeaks was shocking. So at the end of last year, well, actually it was January 3rd when this memo came out, but they were scrambling between Christmas and New Year's to come out with something. OMB and ISOO put together what we thought was a very reasonable response. Agencies, please evaluate how you are managing your information. Look at information security, the handling of classified information. Look at your employee, your management of employees and your reviews of employees. Okay, this all, this seems like a reasonable response until you look at the checklist that they attached to the memo, which said, hey, agencies, do you ask your employees if they are grumpy? Do you evaluate their pre- and post-employment visits to websites like WikiLeaks? And alarm bells go off. We sent a letter with some of our partners in the NGO community and said, are you really asking agencies, is this the guidance that you are giving? Is this where the direction we are headed in with information? Because we have civil liberties concerns, we have employee rights concerns, we have whistleblower rights concerns, and we think this message is off. A meeting resulted from that letter, and we were told, you're right, we messed up. Wow, we really didn't intend for the agencies, first of all, to use the checklist and ensure that they are, this was just things that were in some agencies, and that list that you're concerned about came from the intelligence community. Now, okay, there are, behavioral issues are legitimate in terms of employee review in the intelligence community. That's different from being a civilian employee. That's really, really different. They said, we also agree, like there's some concerns here, and they said we would like to put into balance, the civil liberties and whistleblower protections that you're concerned with national security. And we said, great. Why don't you put that in a letter? How about another memo? Let's do another memo, and we're still waiting for that.
So, and there was a similar, or at least a related reaction in Congress, where access to WikiLeaks was cut off, both for congressional staff and for the Library of Congress, including CRS. There's sort of a willful blinding to the nature of the information that had been made available, where also executive branch employees were threatened with punishment if they were to either during work hours or otherwise go to any of these sites. And it seems that this is sort of a cutting off of valuable information. As more and more of this information becomes available, maybe this is sort of a good broader kind of information sharing question. Maybe this could be good for you. Does it make sense to have the government saying there are places that you can look for information, places that you can't look for information, the avenues that you're allowed to explore and avenues that you will be punished, whether you look there on the public's time or looking at it on your own free time? Is this a sensible response? I mean, sort of can guess what I might think about this, but is this sort of a sensible response? And if not, assuming that there is classified information that's being made available through bulk releases on WikiLeaks or elsewhere, what would an appropriate governmental response be to something like this?
Well, I'll take that. For starters, the idea that there are 2 to 3 million people with security clearances with access to, quote, classified information is absurd. I mean, when so many people have access to secrets, they're not really secrets. So I think, it's time to dust off a copy of Daniel Patrick Moynihan's report from 1996-97 that he did on this issue of overclassification. And the government does have secrets it needs to keep, and it should focus on those, but at the same time it should, I think, deregulate a great deal of stuff that is now just, it's almost like a system that's out of control. The lesson of Bradley Manning is when that many people have access to classified information, all it takes is one person, the weakest link, if you will, who maybe for reasons of conscience, maybe he was having emotional problems, whatever it is, the weakest link is the place where you have to worry about a failure happening. And so the right answer, I think, is focus first on the things that are truly important to keep secret and strengthen your procedures for protecting that kind of information. And at the same time, the rest of the government, I think we need to move into a philosophy that what government does should be public by default and secret only when necessary, and not the opposite. And this is the 21st century. It's going to happen either because of enlightened action on the part of government or because we, the people who pay for government, will do it to government. And that will be messy and disruptive. I'll give you an example of how this could work in a less charged area than national security. When President Obama came into office, one of his first priorities was the spending on recovery. And Congress passed a huge $787 billion spending package. And one of the things that he said he would do to involve the public in helping watch that this money was actually being well spent was create a website called recovery.gov. And he made a couple of speeches where he said, we will invite you to be the eyes and ears, and you can help report whether the money that was supposed to be spent on, say, expanding a local elementary school is actually being spent properly, and it isn't just going into the pockets of, the nephew of the mayor. But recovery.gov has never really involved the public in a new way. They have a number you can call or an email address that you can send tips to. But the idea of engaging we the people in co-creating better, more effective government is an idea that is still waiting to be implemented. And there was an opportunity there, I think, also to help change how government works and help begin to restore trust in government as something that can make people's lives better. When you hear stories like Christians of, a small agency allegedly just wasting money, I mean, that's fodder for people just saying, forget it, government is only the problem and not the solution, and we should just get our money back. So you would think that this administration would make it more of a priority, though I don't think this is a partisan issue. This idea of engaging all of us in helping government work better it can be adopted by liberals and conservatives alike. Because what I think at the end of the day people want is just smarter and more effective government, more efficient government. They don't care whether it's big or small. And so to bring this back to how we approach the issue of whistleblowing, I think the philosophy needs to be we need to encourage it. We need to reward agencies for having more waste, fraud, and abuse being uncovered rather than less. And they need to be supported because they think right now that they will be punished because this is a sign of failure, right? But if we're going to fix our government, we have to accept that we're going to root out some failure along the way. And this is natural to the business world. I mean, Google's philosophy is fail quickly. And in government, you're not allowed to fail once. And that's why I think we still see this culture of punishing the whistleblower rather than giving them an award.
Anybody else want to?
Yeah, lots to talk about there. The recovery.gov experience, while disappointing in terms of bringing crowdsourcing of government to a new level, did have a remarkably low incidence of fraud and waste, and was a success on many levels in terms of more transparency in government spending than we've ever had before. And it's now become the model for a government-wide board to reduce waste and fraud and to create a similar website, a similar portal for government-wide financial spending. The President issued an executive order about a month ago to create that. Earl Devaney, who's one of our best inspectors general, who led the Recovery Act board, will be now doing this new board, leading the new board. And Chairman Issa has a bill to create a similar board and to create data standards so that we actually, the money that we're spending, whether it's reported by an agency or by the recipient of government funds, we'll be able to actually track it for the first time. So there's some promising, I think, transparency policies on the horizon, But in terms of getting to the point, as you said, Micah, where the lines between government and citizen blur, I actually think that those lines are becoming harder. I think that the walls are going up. Because I think when you have members of Congress who have to fundraise and who are looking at unlimited spending by special interests in their elections, it means they're going to be representing naturally fewer and fewer public interests, citizen interests, and I think I'm seeing more and more government secrecy in the agencies. While we're pursuing more transparency, it's that accountability piece of transparency. Transparency means different things to different people. To the president, it means participation, collaboration, and that's been great too. You know, that's all good, but then the accountability piece might get lost behind, and that's the least popular aspect of transparency, unless, of course, you're holding someone else accountable.
Great. So we're going to start taking questions from the audience in just a minute. But before we do that, actually, I had just sort of one additional question for Christian, which is, you saw the bad things were happening, and you tried to respond to it. And can you talk a little bit more about the process in which you tried to correct the problems that were existing, and sort of the pushback that you received, and just sort of how that's played out?
Initially, I wrote a memorandum to my patrol agent in charge, or assistant patrol agent in charge, describing that we were going to get 12 new agents, and that we would need a purpose, we would need a mission, and that supervisors were bored. I myself had been tailed by one of my supervisors, and that was one of the reasons why I wrote that memorandum, is he has nothing to do. He just tailed me before the shift. So I wrote a memorandum, and I explained that if we don't have some type of mission or purpose, you're going to get this backlash with all these agents that have nothing to do. And that's what we're going to start seeing, not only for myself, but for others that are already articulated that they're depressed. I walked into a meeting. It was a video conferencing, and it was between other specialty details, and I told him I didn't have to be there if it was a private video conference, and he said no. But the premise of the video conference was detailing the boredom of agents on the other side in another stations, at other stations, and that this is a problem. So they are aware that boredom is a problem, and that we're wasting taxpayers' dollars when these resources could be shifted to other areas where we do have an inflow or an influx of gangs, illegal aliens. So because I've voiced that out, retaliation has started, and it's been pretty taxing on myself and my family.
Thank you. So we're going to ask for questions from the audience. We have someone getting a microphone. Good. Sounds like it's working. So we have a gentleman in the back, in the blue shirt.
In the back?
Yeah. Mm.
My question is to you, Ms. Lerner. It seems to me in the great pie of government waste, fraud, and abuse, a really big slice is in the United States military. My question to you is, what is your office planning on doing to expand your presence into the military? And I'm not talking about acquisitions. That's bad enough. I'm talking about the day-to-day operations of the military, getting stories like your own, and dealing with this exploding cost of the day-to-day operations in the Pentagon.
It's a great question. The Department of Defense obviously has a very active Office of Inspector General, and we would already hope to, we've already been in touch with folks in that office and hope to work closely with them. But to the extent that our office is limited in terms of what we can investigate, we can't just go after the Department of Defense. We have to have a specific complaint. We have to have a specific disclosure So in order to do an investigation or to bring the attention of a problem to an agency head, we have to be on the receiving end. So to that extent, we're somewhat limited, but to the extent that we can work with agency inspector generals, we will do so. And one of the things that I am doing is sitting on something called the Council of Inspector Generals, where I meet very regularly with the inspector generals from each of the agencies, including the Department of Defense, to talk about these issues.
So just a brief follow-up. The problem from my own experience, as I was in the military for 5 years, is that there just isn't an avenue like a recovery.gov for troops at the low level to, report waste, fraud, and abuse. And going to the Inspector General, just, those folks deal with, complaints about what my commander's doing, so on and so forth. The problem from, again, my own experiences is just there isn't a resource for these guys to blow the whistle.
They can come to the Office of Special Counsel. I encourage that, and I don't, other than right now, other than going to the IG or coming to the Office of Special Counsel, I'm not aware of any other outlet. But there may be some that I'm not aware of. But I hear your concern, and it's an important one.
Let me just follow up briefly. So, as currently instantiated your office, do you have the power to start investigations on your own, or do you have to wait until a complaint is brought to you?
At least historically, the way it's worked is that we can't sua sponte go after something that we may read about in the paper or hear about. We actually have to have someone come to us and say, I'm aware of a situation. And this happens through a disclosure unit. Mm-hmm. Now, it's a little bit different when someone has a claim of retaliation or a prohibited personnel practice. And the Office of Special Counsel doesn't just deal with disclosures and whistleblower complaints. I mean, we actually have a very broad mandate. We deal with complaints from members of the military under USERRA, the Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act. We deal with Hatch Act cases, which unfortunately has taken up more and more of our time recently. And we deal with all types of prohibited personnel practices, not just retaliation complaints after someone has blown the whistle. So things like sexual orientation discrimination, political affiliation, marital status, and other types of prohibited personnel practices are also within our jurisdiction. And then there's the disclosure unit, which is the unit that takes the complaints from people who want to make a disclosure. So,
how many people are in your office?
The agency has 110 full-time employees, and we have 3 field offices, one in Detroit, one in Oakland, and one in Dallas, and we have about 4,000 complaints a year. So a lot to do with very few resources.
So other in front?
I have two two sides of the coin question for Christian. One is on the wasted spending. When agents aren't driving the Baja 500 and they're stuck in the office, how do they spend their time if there's no casework to do? The other question is about the retaliation. And have there been any other invasions of your family's privacy besides sitting in front of the house while you're at work or opening your mail?
To answer the first question, I've witnessed supervisor just play his musical instrument the whole 10 hours of our shift. So that's pretty much one of the indications that a supervisor just lets me know that there's no work to do. If the supervisor is playing his instrument all day long for his honor guard, there's nothing to do. Another agent has told me that he's seen another supervisor with his gun belt off and his feet propped up on the desk reading a 300-page book. So those are 2 examples of what I've seen where our supervisory management, it really has nothing to do, and that's what we're following is their leadership. and that's just letting us know about that. And on your second question, when my wife and I go to my lawyer's office, we've had vehicles taking pictures of us coming on the opposite traffic just out of nowhere. We're just seeing flashes towards our vehicle, and also at his office when we're getting off, my children will notice that someone's looking at us, and then my wife and I had noticed that someone was taking the pictures of us from that angle from the building where we were about to enter. So
It sounds like they've found something to occupy their time, unfortunately not perhaps the right thing. We had a... Ma'am, do you still have a question? Yeah.
This is kind of a follow-up to the question that was asked by the person who said he was in the military. In general, for people who are in the government, it seems like there are kind of limited forums, or at least from their standpoint, it may not be something that they would automatically do, go to the OSC or go to whatever, go to the IG hotline and make a complaint or report something. And I'm wondering, with the discussion from people on this new age of transparency and with web access and other things that allow people to communicate information, do you have any ideas on maybe not even government specific, but for any organization where they're looking for, I would get away from the word whistleblowing, we're looking for disclosures or information on things that may not be right or things that just may be, could be done better. If there's something on the horizon that seems promising to allow employees of any organization to actually make those types of disclosures in the new era of web access and where people can report things and blog on things, and is there something beside the basic requirements or the basic laws that surround whistleblowing, the formal structure that seems to be promising in terms of the area of getting people comfortable to going out and making sort of disclosures of any type? Do you have any ideas on that?
Well, I think one thing about the new age is also the degree to which it is empowering people who want to remain anonymous. I mean, we're talking about whistleblowing, which typically involves someone, speaking up publicly, and there are all sorts of risks that come with that. But I mean, it's not a new phenomenon of people making anonymous tips to whatever, to news organizations or to police or relevant authorities. I think that one thing that is coming, and we'll probably see first signs of this later this year, is in the wake of WikiLeaks, there is a new project called OpenLeaks, which is designed to sort of deal with some of the obvious problems with WikiLeaks, which is to say WikiLeaks has a lot of power. It's all centralized in the hands of one individual who is, let's say, a bit controversial, and who has his own agenda about what information should be used for, whereas OpenLeaks is being built by programmers who used to work with WikiLeaks, and their goal is to make it easy for lots of organizations to receive information anonymously, to verify its validity, and to make it available to responsible media. And so once that happens, I think we will see a sort of digital version of more whistleblowing taking place by insiders who don't want to risk retaliation. I mean, I think, this, Angela, you said something interesting in your opening remarks about, if I heard you correctly, if we don't strengthen the laws to sort of channel whistleblowing appropriately through government, then we're going to see more leaking. And I wonder if you would say a little bit more about that. I think that's right. I do think we're going to see more. I mean, again, it ain't just leaking now, it's a flood. And it's going to grow as more people realize that the benefits can outweigh the costs.
Well, and I also agreed with your point about the overclassification being a huge contributor to the problem, and that we should only be keeping secret our legitimate classified information that legitimately should be classified. You know, my organization has been one of a handful of organizations that have served as a kind of outlet for those who have information that they want to disclose. So we get, you know, hundreds and hundreds of calls in a month, and when we're able, when we have the resources, when there's a systematic problem or one of great importance to the American public, then we'll use our resources to help get that information out and find some solutions to the problem. But we can't do it all, and we certainly right now are not doing it in the way in which OpenLeaks would provide, or another venue. I mean, I would say that there are unlimited places for people to blog, to use social media, but you know, where is the place for them to go so that there's real attention paid? The right people are watching and looking. We've been pushing the government to do this in different areas. So the new Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, we were urging them to put complaints online openly, allow people to say that they're getting ripped off by this, you know, credit card company, or the fees are really high over here. And we're going to continue to urge them to do that, but we had to pass a law to get the Consumer Product Safety Commission to do the same, and that was tough. That was really tough. And industries don't want, you know, this information out there. But so I would say it's not going to come from government first, this solution. It's going to come from innovators outside.
And just to add sort of one more point that's responsive to the question as well, we just, at Sunlight, we just did a survey of congressional websites for many different types of content. And one thing that we looked at was how many congressional committee pages have a place where people can engage in whistleblowing. And I think it was only 4 or 5 congressional committee websites actually had a place prominently featured, or featured at all, where you could go in and either get instructions or file a complaint to the committee. And there's, I forget the exact number, but there's maybe 50 congressional committees, something like that. Maybe 2/3 of them are engaged in oversight. So there are a lot of people that could benefit from this information, but the most prominent way that people find out about what they're doing doesn't even have a means for people to engage in this kind of reporting. So there are certainly things that can be done even within the narrow congressional context to encourage these kinds of communications. I also want to highlight something that Micah said in his book as sort of a kickoff to a question that I have for all of you. He wrote, and I apologize for quoting you back to yourself, whistleblowing is a vital part of a healthy democracy and also of a healthy global culture. For people in positions of power, the knowledge that what they are doing might someday be leaked or otherwise exposed can shift behavior in a better direction. So the question that I have, or one of the questions that I have, is we are starting to see more and more information coming available in these kinds of ways, whether it was 30 or 40 years ago where you start seeing the newspapers playing this new kind of role with the Pentagon Papers, to much more recently where blogs and anonymous comments and all these other kinds of things are changing the social dynamic of what's going on, that the emergence of mashing up data, it helps reveal trends that would be hidden otherwise. By putting together different data sets, we can find out really interesting things about, oh, someone gave a donation 2 days before a vote and an amendment that was going to be considered has been withdrawn, and happen to be the people who gave the money were also opponents of that amendment. I mean, you can start making these kinds of connections, and we're seeing this happen again and again and again and again. And as more information is made available in useful formats, we're able to draw more of these connections. But what I want to know is, since this is happening, is this changing the behavior of government? Is the response to clamp down? And we've seen perhaps some prosecutions coming from the Obama administration. Is it to open up in different ways? Is it to avoid engaging in otherwise inappropriate behaviors. What are you seeing on the ground? What's happening?
I'm seeing not just one thing. I mean, certainly there is a nascent and growing open government culture that has grown out of the Open Government Directive. And we're talking about people getting together and thinking about how to make their agencies more open, what information is considered high value. You got the right people in the room. You got public affairs talking to the techies, talking to the policy people for the first time about these kinds of things and thinking about government service in a different way. That's very positive, although, it's just beginning. So there are some success stories, but, over time, this is going to take time to change culture, and especially culture that is resistant to change. But then on the other hand, we have really a national security, I don't know what the word is. It's almost like its own government. It's almost like its own entity. The national security mindset, the national security community, the buzzword that we've given people a pass for a really long time, especially since 9/11, on just pulling the national security card whenever they want to keep things secret. And to be honest, sometimes it's just easier to keep a secret because it's just easier to do things the way you've always done it. It's just less trouble. So it's not always for nefarious reasons, but agencies are the ones, particularly with national security responsibilities, are actively seeking, to withhold more and more information. And those that have something embarrassing to hide also are similarly seeking more exemptions from the Freedom of Information Act, and we're all the time dealing with those. So I think it's a mixed bag. Eventually there will be a tipping point. There will be a tipping point where there's just so much information out there, and we've got to get to the point where it's easier for information to get out. Right now, the process is so designed to require a request for information. So we need to, for example, label records at birth so that they can just automatically be disclosed instead of, being put into boxes and then, requiring people to send in, please send me this. So we have this. We will get there, I'm sure. I think we're edging towards it, but it's going to take some time and some work.
Great. Okay. Yes. Where is the lady in the front, please?
When we talk about federal employees, I think that we use that synonymously with folks in the executive branch. Are there any ideas or thoughts on extending whistleblower protections to those in the legislative branch for those things that wouldn't be protected by the speech and debate clause of the Constitution?
There's a bill Senator Grassley regularly introduces that would provide for whistleblower protections for congressional staff. I don't think it's ever had a hearing.
Right, and there was also a recent court decision that further narrowed employee protections for congressional staff. I don't remember all of the details, but it was, unfortunately, it further weakened the ability of folks to go to the internal reporting agency within Congress. I don't know if it was a statutory interpretation or constitutional interpretation. I have to look at it more closely. But there has been action from a legal point of view on that kind of thing as well. But we do see a continuing distinction between congressional employees and those in the executive and judicial branches in terms of the protections that are afforded to them. Unfortunately, for congressional staff, it's much less than in other contexts. So,
can I just add one thing? There is the Congressional Accountability Act for not dealing with whistleblower or speech issues, but for things like employment discrimination, sexual harassment, sex discrimination. And the idea when Congress passed that act was to make Congress subject to the same laws that private sector employers are subject to. Unfortunately, it hasn't worked out quite as well as we all had hoped, but it is there and it is a mechanism.
The gentleman in the middle, please.
Thank you. With your areas of expertise, what can someone in a Mr. Sanchez's position be doing? And then as a follow-up, if you had a magic wand, what could Congress be doing when they saw someone with the sort of problems described by Mr. Sanchez?
Go ahead.
So I think that, I don't know if you've taken your complaint to the Office of Special Counsel yet, but in the past that's been not advisable. Honestly, when we have had whistleblowers come to us, the first thing we say is stay anonymous if you can, but know that you probably can't. And then think about what you're risking. And now I think that it's certainly, the Office of Special Counsel will fulfill its role in receiving complaints and doing investigations in a way that has been not happening for a really long time. So there's the Office of Special Counsel, there's the Inspectors General seeking legal counsel, seeking help from organizations like the Government Accountability Project, or coming to make disclosures to a group like POGO. Also meeting with your members of Congress and making them aware of the problems. And then members of Congress, I think some offices, some committees, even if they don't have on their websites hotlines for whistleblowers, some committees and some members of Congress in particular work very hard with whistleblowers on their disclosures, and others not so much. So it depends on what your issue is, whether you're going to have good luck with Congress. But Congress needs to fix the law so that Mr. Sanchez has better protection.
So there's the second half of that question, which is the magic wand part, which is, okay, with the law the way it is now, what needs to be done to change it so that it works better to protect whistleblowers? And there's legislation that's pending, of course, but with the bad court rulings and other things that's going on, what is necessary? Where do the changes need to be made?
As I mentioned, the Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act does a fair job of addressing the major concerns with the current law, so closing loopholes that have been created by the bad case law, expanding protections, providing normal access to court, providing Office of Special Counsel with additional authority and ability to participate and be helpful in whistleblower cases that go to the MSPB, and an ombudsman for inspectors general offices for whistleblowers. So there's someone dedicated to working with whistleblowers within each of those offices.
If I may just add, if my office is going to be effective, if Congress wants to send their constituents to the Office of Special Counsel and be able to tell them that, you're going to be able to get help from this office, I need resources. When you can't cut this agency's budget significantly and expect us to handle 4,000 complaints a year in the way in which they deserve to be treated, and so I would just say that we're going to work really hard to try and get Congress aware that appropriations that are provided to this agency will be very well spent.
What's the overall appropriation? What was it in last year? Do you know?
For fiscal year 11, our appropriation was 18.5. Congress, the House of Representatives, in its current appropriations bill, has recommended 17.9, so it's a cut.
6%.
Yeah, and the recommended level that the White House asked for was 19.5, and we had requested 20 million, which is still, just a speck of dust on the federal budget. It's a tiny, tiny amount of money for the type of work that we do and the payback that I think the federal government can expect if we're doing our job correctly in the way in which it needs to be done. we're also getting 200 to 300 more cases a year under a USERA demonstration project. So a lot of our resources are going to have to go to helping veterans and members of the military and the reserves, which is obviously important. But in terms of really being a robust, effective agency, we need the resources to do that work.
So staying on that subject for a second, and if I could wave a magic wand, what I would say is I would love to see the Office of Special Counsel, in the same way that you're using electronic media like these microphones and those C-SPAN cameras to make a strong case for the vital work that you do. I would love to see the office also enter the digital age and embrace both the ability to have a two-way conversation with the public through social media and also help educate the public about the value of what you do so that it becomes a little bit of a higher priority, say as much as military bands in terms of the funding that you get.
Those are definitely both priorities. You know, getting a Facebook page, revamping our website so that it is more interactive and provides meaningful information to the stakeholders of the office and all federal employees. Those are really high priorities. Doing education and outreach, a very high priority. You know, going out to the agencies, doing programs like this one. You know, I'm here today because I want to get the word out. But again, it takes resources, it takes people, and we have, you know, competing interests in, you know, how do we balance trying to get complaints investigated and, you know, robust representation, and do our website and do outreach and, you know, do all the other things that we need to do. So, but they're all priorities, I assure you.
I totally agree, and I just want to say that the idea that the work of government has to only be done by people who are paid by government is one of the changes, one of the culture changes that I'm arguing for, that we have to get rid of that idea. So you're right, certain things have to be done by the responsible people who are paid. But the fact is that I'm sure that people who are watching this, not just the people in this room, instinctively think that supporting whistleblowers through the Office of Special Counsel is a vital government function, and they would be willing to help. So you are not stuck with only the resources that you get through the formal appropriation. There are these other public resources to tap. That's what social media enables. It isn't just a tool for better communicating out. It's also a way for taking in, and it can be whether it's whistleblowing, you know, reports of problems that need to be investigated, or other means of involving the public. It's we the people, not we the government. And so I just urge you, and I'm sure the Sunlight Foundation, as part of its mission to help keep opening up government, would love to work with your office and other offices in government on ways to tap into the civic surplus. People, the same people who post comments on blogs and make edits on Wikipedia pages out of the goodness of their hearts, I think would also be happy to donate time, ideas, attention to making government work better.
Great. So, unfortunately, although I know that we have more questions, we've come up to the end of our allotted time. I'd like to thank our panelists, Carolyn Lerner, Angela Canterbury, Christian Sanchez, and Micah Sifry, for traveling, for enlightening us in this conversation. Thank you all so much for coming. And we'll have our next Advisory Committee on Transparency event in late September, early October. Thank you all for coming, and have a good day. Thanks.
Just to ask, and this is kind of, we'll talk about whether I'm talk about this more in the discussion, how I'm here from a millennial nonprofit organization, and you know, kind of but still, I mean, it's being very good. I mean, I'm sorry to go through those types of issues. And I saw the process on how to just ask about the fact that whistleblowers aren't really able to go and go to journalists because journalists are more often subpoenaed now for those types of issues.